And we're back. All right, great. So last but not least, with my me story commentary, let's see what's going on here with the SI. Now, this one is going to be the most important for me, right? So if you guys don't know, I probably should have mentioned my type, but long story short, I'm audio, NETE, play, consume, blast, sleep, so sleep last. And then on top of that, my SI is at the bottom, and it's masculine, and my two saviors are so addicted to any that like SI is going to be the biggest blind spot for me, right? And so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna play it, and I'm going to, much like the last video I did with FI, I'm going to flip the script, because I know the original intent of this was to highlight the darkness and the dangers of being addicted to these functions, but I'm finding value in also trying to learn from what the lead SIs are doing or what the lead FIs are doing, and then try and see how I can implement that in my life, and then also see where I am failing to be more like what they're about to say about SI in my life. So that's what I'm about to do, and then I'm just gonna leave a few comments and then finish up the series.
So, okay, so to SI, introverted sensing.
There's about to be an ad, so ignore this ad. Like, you better pay me for this ad, so ignore that. All right, let's get back to it.
Okay. So it's an interesting function. I admire SI so much, and it baffles me in so many ways, and I have so much respect for it, and then I also absolutely loathe it if I'm having to face it sometimes.
You have to do it. Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's just, there's something about it that it almost feels painful to do, but I'm I have so much respect for this thing.
Yeah.
But I'm supposed to know that you check. I did this video on SI where it was I found these cleaning lists that people create, people who are really good at the SI cleaning stuff.
Right.
That brought attention to the fact that I didn't even know that you're supposed to wash a wall or wash it and then I looked at my door. I'm oh my gosh, it's filthy, and I'm this is
Why have that link?
Yeah, and I was oh gosh, so I have so much respect for it, but it's also painful. But for those who have SI first, so our ISJ types,
right,
what are they getting hit with as it relates to the NE at the bottom of their stack?
Okay.
All right, so real quick, and I've actually made a video about SI and how NI is fucking sloppy, right? That's my little bias. I'm gonna put that in the description as well. But let me start with that, right? So with SI, so she's looking at it from an outside point of view. So Lindsay's NI, I think she's masculine NI actually. So she is very much about order. She's very much about doing things her way and doing things in a sequential manner. But what she's pointing out is just how granular and how specific and how almost arbitrary SI looks. But for me, and this is something I mentioned in that video about SI, is I find SI planning and SI preparation way more useful. Maybe that's because it's in my stack, but I would much rather know specifically how to do something than have a general rule of thumb, because the problem with the general rule of thumb is when you get to the specifics, you're gonna have a hard time. So for example, for me, or let me take a step back. Yeah, so for me, I used to use abstract systems for organizing, right? And I still kind of do, right? So GTD is a good example. So David Allen, NITI, play last, right? Or TINI rather. His system is universal, he claims, right? So you have these 5 steps of capture, clarify, organize, reflect, and act. And that's how you should get control over any aspect of your life. And I here's the thing. I think that NI is legitimate. I think that's something I do try and practice. But for me, it's okay, well, what about I need to know how that applies to my job, for example, right? How do I specifically do that at my job? And yes, there's going to be overlaps with the steps, but it's only when David Allen gives me those specifics of, okay, do something for 2 minutes or less if you can get it out the way. Delegate this if you can't do that. Organize things into context lists so that you can have one phone call list for all of your phone calls, no matter what you're working on, right? That once he starts getting specific like that, that's when I find value in it. And I think the problem, this is my little rant again, but one of the problems that I have with NI is that they won't get granular like that. And they'll just be well, I told you that you needed to clarify what you needed to do. And I'm dude, no. And so for me, I do have an admiration for SI as well with her. I find greater utility in it than I guess these people do. But I think in my life, I do still struggle to follow the instruction manual, if you will. Like I have it in my stack, so I am tracking where there are, let's say, step-by-step specific instruction manuals, but I do tend to rush things and I do tend to ignore the steps, and then that's what gets me into trouble. So anyway, that's my little rant. Let me continue on here.
Right. It's funny that you say that. So just channel change. Like Martha Stewart, I used to get every single like Martha Stewart or Martha Stewart weddings or whatever, like back in the day when I was in, junior high and high school. And she always had this calendar in the beginning of the magazine that was like what her calendar was, SIFI. Yeah. And it was the...
Okay, stop. So I didn't even catch this, so before she continues. So Martha Stewart is on my quadra as well. Martha Stewart is SIFI Sleep Blast Play. So she's a bit extroverted like me, but she is still doing the sleep. And so Shan is channel changing, but this channel changing is providing me value. So I'm actually grateful for that, because one thing she described as SIFI is, let me actually go back to that. I think she was talking about her calendar. I did not catch this the first few times.
I didn't even know that you're, this is
Why
like,
I have that link?
yeah, and I was like, oh, gosh, SJ.
Right. It's funny that you say that. So just channel change. Like Martha Stewart, I used to get every single like Martha Stewart or Martha Stewart weddings or whatever, like back in the day when I was in, junior high and high school. And she always had this calendar in the beginning of the magazine that was like what her calendar was, SIFI.
Okay, interesting. So Shan is interpreting Martha Stewart sharing her personal calendar with the world as an example of SIFI. So what would that be? Here is my system that I value. It'd be something like that, right? And especially when you think about a calendar is very segmented. I mean, I don't know if you guys use time blocks or familiar with that. Like, here's what I do at this time, here's what I do at that time. And so Shan is associating Martha sharing her personal calendar as SIFI. I do not do that. That is definitely an area, unsurprisingly, with Sleep Last, that's definitely an area where I'm still building my routines as is. I've definitely been trying to use James Clear's, atomic habit structure of making 2-minute habits, 1-minute habit, 30-second habits. And I have been doing that, but I definitely have been way too embarrassed to share that with the rest of the world. Whereas I guess with Martha Stewart, she's blasting out her sleep. She's like, hey, every newsletter, every month, I guess, Martha Stewart is so proud of her systems, right? The FI, proud, is that she's sharing it with the rest of the world, whether they asked for it or not. So I think that's a really good learning lesson. I did not catch that. So I'm glad that I caught that. And I think maybe, one thing that I definitely could do moving forward is I could definitely share with you guys via video what my morning and evening and routines are. And then also for people who are in OP, I do have a sleep routine now, in the sense of putting on the breaks throughout the day. And I could definitely share that. So yeah, I guess that's valuable. So I'm glad that I caught that. Well, let's continue.
Yeah. And it was the most insane shit where it's like every week she was like changing her sheets, like changing out all the sheets in her giant house. I'm like, every week you're changing all of them? You're not just washing them, you're like changing them, like what the... And then it was just like washing the walls, stuff like that, like polishing the silver. I'm like, no one does that. Like, no. She actually does that. Like,
no,
what
this
are you
is
doing?
real. As SE does, you're like, no one does that.
No one
making
does
it up.
that. Which is exactly what I thought back then. I'm like, no one does that. And I just thought like, oh, this is just a lie to be like suggestions. And like, the more I like actually knew, who she was, I'm like, oh, she really is doing that.
Yeah.
And so here's the interesting thing. Let me talk about SI a little bit. The interesting thing about SI is that so take Martha Stewart. She's super clean and super organized in her personal life. That's not every SI. I mean, some SIs you'll go into their house and you're like, oh my God, it's a hoarder house. It's what they randomly, again, it's the same thing. OIs are so the same. IJs are very much the same. I have two IJs here. One's an SI, one's an NI, and they're so much the same because they both have pet projects. It's both specific to the person. It's what they happen to be OI, hamster wheeling on. And just with the SIs, it's specific, and with the NI, it's the grand scheme.
Okay, so there's a lot going on there. Fuck, I might have to replay that one as well, because maybe unsurprisingly, since it's my last function, I've replayed this interview several times, but I never really understood what they meant. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I think it's worth unpacking. So the first thing, Shan mentioned that SI does not always equal cleanliness, right? Which is kind of the stereotype in the MBTI and OP communities, right? If you have SI, especially, you know, if you're Martha Stewart type, you should be clean, your house should be clean and everything like that. Shan is saying no to that. And what she's saying instead is that she describes not just SI, but OI. She described OI as having pet projects. And this is the first time I've ever heard Dave or Shan, I mean, or I guess anyone, describe OI as a pet project. I never framed it that way. I mean, I definitely know that OI has been called like having an OI box of like maybe information or things that they're working on, which I guess is a pet project. But for some reason, the word pet project or the phrase pet project resonates with me a lot more. But let me word it this way. It makes more sense to me because that's more of a, like, that's something I can see other people doing, and I guess I could see myself doing a little bit. But I guess I don't always know, like when I look at someone with OI, I don't assume that they have pet projects they're working on. So maybe that's something I could talk about at a later point, not today. But that was definitely the first thing that caught my eye when I was listening to the interviews. Now, one thing that she also said though is OI in general is hamster wheeling on something, which I guess is also the pet project or the IJ box stereotype, right? Now I don't know why that is. Like that's also something that's a little bit weird. Like, why would someone be addicted to hamster wheeling on something? I do know that, that probably is true for sleep, right? Because one way that they describe sleep is learning via repetition. But I don't know if I could say the same about someone who's like super extroverted, like someone who's like blast, play, sleep, like Lindsay, or blast, play, consume, like, Ed Milet or something like that. So these, let me put it this way. There's a lot for me to learn about SI, I guess. I never really knew that all these things were associated with SI or OI. And I do have pet projects, but I definitely am, embarrassed by them. And I definitely don't put in that much time into each of my pet projects, to be honest. And so if that's the void in my life that I'm leaving, I'm not doing enough in terms of my pet projects. That's something that I definitely need to put more time into, or at least put some more habits into. Okay. And then the last thing that she said that was very interesting. So Shan and I have opposite biases, and I think it's just because of our type. So Shan, whether she knows it or not, she's basically framing NI as better than SI, and I'm always framing SI as better than NI. So what she's about to say is, SI is about specifics, arbitrary specifics, and NI is about the grand scheme, right? And about, in the grand scheme of things, we need to do this, this, this. And look, that's fucking true. I'm not even going to argue that. But the trade-off is that NI and SE are fucking sloppy. Like, I don't know how else to word that. I keep reiterating that because it's just like a deep FI, like, frustration that I have with SI and NE, or SE and NI, sorry. It's just, they're just sloppy as fuck. And then I think what's worse too, is that especially when it comes to habit formation, if you're building habits based on your sloppy execution, even if you have the, even if you have the grand scheme, you're not going to get the most out of it that someone who was precise in building their habits did, right? So anyway, those are all rants. Those aren't necessarily relevant, but I have to get that off my chest because it has been bothering me about that axis for a little while. So let me go ahead and get back to it.
This comes after this, comes after this, comes after this. So it's not necessarily every SI you're going to meet is going to be good with cleaning their walls. A lot of them are not. So it's the. All
right, so mute. Oh, all right. I'm not trying to go to jail. I don't want copyright. All right, let's go back to this.
It's responsible to track things in physical reality. So a lot of them will go after things like their finances. They will go after things like healthcare. They will go after things like 401ks.
Okay, so stop. When she said, so this is something that I did catch when I first started listening to this interview for the past few weeks. When Shan started pointing these out, I was shocked that no one else worried about that. Like Lindsay and Shan were like, no, I don't worry about my 401k. And like, I guess I was under the impression that all OI worried about that, but I guess that is SI. So even for me with SI last, that when I'm organizing, obviously that's what I want to organize. I want to organize my finances. I want to make sure that I'm making money. I want to make sure that all my like work systems and my home systems are in place. Like, and so this was definitely a culture shock for me that both of them were like, yeah, no, I don't give a fuck about that. I was like, well, how is that possible? And then one last thing. So actually going back to the previous excerpt. Actually, I almost forgot. One other thing that Shan said that I definitely don't do enough of and that I need to learn from is she talks about how OI, right? OI gets like locked into their own random subjective interests, right? And I think that's something I need to really like talk about or really understand more, because like I guess maybe it's because I'm so extroverted, I don't know, but I am under the impression that all OI would be the same as every other OI. But, you know, even though like, and yes, there's commonalities, like they talk in chapters, or they hamster wheel, but it's almost like based on what she's saying, it's almost like OI, or really the introverted functions, are where you are the most individual. Like that's where you as an individual shine, right? And it's because your OI is not going to be the same exactly as everyone else's OI. Your DI is not going to be the same as everyone else's DI. So I think there's a beauty in that, where, you know, with my SI, let's say, it might be trying to organize something that no one else in the environment is worried about. And I think for me, especially as a savior extroverted person, right, DE and OE, I get kind of scared, and you know, that's why I'm constantly checking the tribe to be like, hey, am I on the right track? But it almost sounds like, if Shan's right about introverted functions being so subjective, that like at the end of the day, I only can, like, it's almost like my destiny can only be found in my introverted functions. It's something like that, because that's the only way it will speak to me as an individual, something like that. So that's really beautiful, and I definitely need to practice that more, because I'm definitely not doing enough of that. So let me go ahead and play a little bit more. This is gonna be probably my longest video, because this is my last function, right? And it's like I'm fascinated by it, but I definitely don't do it either. So let me play a little bit more, and then hopefully I can wrap up.
It's like all the stuff that you're like, huh? Like that very specific stuff that I don't respect. I just jump right over, like, yeah, all that stupid shit. Like, I don't pay attention to the 401ks, the whatever. Like, I'm just not interested. But that's where they take the systems that are happening in physical reality very seriously, or just they're.
Sorry, okay, I'm gonna rant one more time. Like, how do you function if you're not worried about that? Someone please help me in the comments. I don't understand how someone with NI could not be worried about that. Like, because now I'm thinking about things like taxes, and I know Dave, and this is actually very fascinating, because Dave Powers has talked about how he would ignore taxes for months, years, and then it would build up and pile up. I'm like, how are you getting away with that, you know? And like, how are you organizing without taking that into account? Is kind of what I'm thinking. So maybe that's my SI, or my, my observer axis bias, right? But this is definitely a culture shock for me. So anyway, let me keep playing a little bit more.
Responsible for them. And, whether it's your specific thing that you're focusing on, it's specific, it's introverted. So they'll have a lot of that stuff in control. Like they'll have their plan. Here's what I'm going to wear next weekend, or I have a trip coming up, and this is what I will wear for my trip coming up. Let me plan my outfits 10 years in advance. Let me plan my whole outfits, and my whole wardrobe is planned, like whatever their SI is locked onto, And the problem with that is, if you're ordering everything in the physical reality, you'll be going to again and again and again, going on these events and going to certain things that you and I would be like, oh my God, but it's like, well, nothing bad has happened yet. You're like watching somebody who's just in their routine, in their way of doing life, where, if you and I were to watch from the outside with NI, we'd be like, oh, you made it through, because the SI is going through like, this is my routine. And if nothing bad has happened in my routine, I'm not really scared by that. I'm not.
Okay. This is going to be the last clip for sure, but really interesting commentary. And I think that is a good critique of SI, and really like my axis, I guess, where it's like, we will put our heads down and just trust the process. I do have a comment on that though. And I don't know if this is something that NI also relates to, but like when I'm building my little baby habits, right? I'm still SI last. I'm not going to pretend that I'm doing that. I do want to trust the routine. And I think part of it is because of what I'm learning about like tiny wins. It's like, so let me go back. And that's something I learned from James Clear, who's NI, right? So it's like, so let me go to this is my doc. You're not going to have access to this, but this is my personal doc. But one thing that I definitely think about a lot is, like, I think about this a lot, where it's like, look, if I'm improving my routine, if I'm improving my physical routine, I'm not going to really see results of that routine for like years, right? Like, because for the first month, the first 3 months, the first 6 months, I'm barely going to see any improvement. But it's only after a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years that I'm really going to see if my routines are working or not. And so I don't know if that's something that NI is not doing or is doing, but like, I definitely know that when I'm doing my routines, that's what I'm thinking of. I'm like, look, like I'm putting in this system. I know factually that this is probably the best course of action for me. And I know it's the best physical system I have. And, you know, even if bad problems come my way, I have to be devoted to this, because this is like the daily return to those habits is the only way that I'm going to start stacking up these exponential improvements. So anyway, okay, so I think that's about it. This is definitely my longest video. I mean, I'm grateful for rewatching it and talking about it, because I mean, I definitely missed a lot of things. So, so the key takeaways is, you know, SI is hard for me. I definitely need to do more of it. I definitely need to, I need to maybe start practicing the Martha Stewart thing, where it's like she's sharing her routines with the world. She's SI, sharing the routine she's proud of with the world. And maybe I need to do that, maybe in another video, right? I'm thinking of doing that. You know, I really got to revisit how is OI being like, you know, getting caught up in pet projects, right? You know, and that's something I need to maybe start tracking. Why is OI hamster wheeling on something, right? Same thing. And then also, you know, just kind of valuing and finding beauty in just the subjective nature of the introverted functions, but also just my SI. It's like my SI probably wants to build something that no one else in my environment wants to build. And even though that scares me, maybe that's exactly what I need, right? And so that's about it. So that's the end of this series. You know, this is a me story commentary. You know, I'm not trying to make, you know, big sociological claims or big OP claims with these videos. So if you have anything like that, or if you want to share your experience with any of these, or if you have even different functions, feel free to kind of share in the comments or make your own videos and maybe share them with me. Other than that, this has been very educational. I'm very grateful. And so, you know, glad you watched it. If you watched it to the end, really appreciate you. And I will see you guys in a little bit. Take care.